He mocked her weakness in front of the fire. But out here, weakness doesn't bury the dead or outrun the wolves. And when his laughter died in the snow, she was the one holding the rifle. Not for vengeance, just survival. The first shot wasn't hers. It cracked across the canyon wall like thunder, and the horses spooked hard enough to pull rope from bark. Vera Langley didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She didn't even move until the third shot hit the ridge behind them, sending down a scatter of brittle shale that hissed through the wind like broken teeth. By then, she had already picked up the rifle. It was heavy in her arms, too long for her frame, and still warm from where Silas had dropped it. He was 10 feet ahead, bleeding from the shoulder, swearing through gritted teeth, and trying to crawl behind a log that offered no real cover. The snow around him bloomed red. She'd only met him 3 days ago. He'd called her Frail that first night, half laughing, half serious, like most men did when they saw a woman ride into a dying town with nothing but a saddlebag and a scar across her cheek. "You're too soft for this stretch," he'd said, poking at the fire. "Out here, softness gets you starved, shot, or worse." She hadn't argued then, just taken her bread and sat by the edge of the fire, waiting for his bravado to pass like smoke on the wind. Now the wind was back, sharp and cruel, dragging the scent of blood and copper and cold gunpowder down from the ridge. Vera crouched low, her legs aching from the climb, the rifle's weight anchoring her like judgment. She didn't know who was shooting, not exactly, but she knew it wasn't random. Someone had followed them, waited until they'd made camp near the stone hollow, waited until Silas had set his boots off and started talking like he trusted her. She should have known better. Trust didn't last out here. Especially not with men like Silas Carr. She fired once badly. The kick threw her shoulder back and rattled her teeth. Somewhere above, a man cursed. Then came silence. Vera held her breath, counting heartbeats until the wind picked up again and blew the smoke clear. She didn't look at Silas, not yet. Her eyes stayed on the ridge, on the place where shadows moved like ghosts between scrub trees and jagged stone. She wasn't sure if she'd hit him. Didn't care much. All she cared about now was getting Silas off the ground and down to the river trail before whoever was out there circled closer. "I'm not dead," Silas grunted, voice hoarse. "Not yet," Vera said. Then finally she looked at him. His face was pale, teeth clenched. The blood hadn't slowed. She pulled a scarf from her coat and pressed it hard against the wound. He hissed through the pain but didn't curse her. That alone felt like a kind of progress. When she reached for his belt to secure the pressure, he didn't flinch. "You carry this?" she asked, nodding toward the rifle. "Everywhere." "Then you should have learned how to hold on to it." He almost laughed, but it caught in his throat and turned into a cough. She braced her boots in the snow and dragged him backward, roughly, without grace. The ridge stayed silent. That scared her more than the bullets. By the time they made it to a low ledge sheltered by pine and rock, her arms were shaking. Silas groaned as she lowered him down, and she didn't tell him to be quiet. What was the point? If they were being hunted, sound wasn't the only thing giving them away. Tracks in the snow, the trail of blood, the smoke from their fire, it all spelled out the same thing. 2 riders, one bleeding, the other not strong enough to carry him far. Prey. "You got a plan?" Silas asked. "No," she said honestly. "Do you?" He smiled grimly. "Shoot first, bury later." "Charming." "I try." The sun was bleeding out along the horizon. It turned the snow the color of rust and set the trees glowing like dying embers. Vera tucked the rifle close and watched the shadows move through the trees again. She didn't trust her aim, not yet. But if it came to a second shot, she'd fire with both hands this time. Not for Silas, for herself, for the space between being a woman men mocked and the one holding the last loaded round. When the voice came from the trees, it was calm, male, confident. "Hand over the cowboy, and we won't have to take the girl too." Silas tensed. Vera didn't move. "You hear me?" the voice called again, closer now. "Ain't no honor in dying for a man who don't even know your name." Vera rose slowly. "He knows it," she called back. Her voice was steady, even. Another laugh echoed off the canyon wall. Well, hell, guess that makes you sweethearts then. Should have brought flowers instead of guns. Vera chambered around. Give him over, the voice said again, colder now, or die with him. You talk too much, she said and fired. This time she hit something. A yelp, followed by cursing and then the crunch of boots scattering back down the trail. It wasn't over, not by a long stretch, but it bought them a moment. She dropped back down beside Sila's, breath hot in her throat. You hit him, he asked. Don't know. You're shaking. I'm angry. Good, he said, stay angry. The night fell hard. They didn't dare light another fire. Vera bound Silas's wound tighter, working by the faint silver light of the moon and what little she could feel by touch. His fever came fast. She kept him awake by talking, telling him things he'd never asked about: Kansas winters, her brother's handwriting, the sound a mother makes when her child stops breathing. He never answered, just blinked and listened and drifted. And when he did finally sleep, she didn't. She kept the rifle across her lap and her boots planted firm in the snow. And when the first wolf cry broke the silence just after midnight, she didn't cry. She just looked down at Sila's and whispered, "You better live long enough to call me Frail again, you bastard." The cry came again, closer. She raised the rifle. She didn't sleep, not even a little. The rifle lay across her lap like a child she didn't know how to hold, and every snapping branch or flutter of snow falling from pine needles made her heart kick hard in her chest. Silas muttered in his fever, twitching every so often, but he didn't wake. His breathing had grown shallow, and even in the dark she could tell he was paler than before. She pressed her fingers to the scarf she'd tied around his shoulder. Hot. Too hot. Infection was setting in. That meant time was running short. But it wasn't just fever pressing at their heels. The woods had grown quieter since the gunfire, too quiet. Not a single night bird, not even the rustle of rodents in the brush. Just snow and the low moan of wind between trees. It wasn't right. And Vera Langley had learned long ago that when nature goes still, it's not mercy, it's warning. The first wolf appeared just before dawn. She caught the glint of its eyes first, low and golden against the dark. Then came its shape, big, low to the ground, muscles rolling beneath a pelt the color of midnight. It didn't growl, didn't snarl, just stood there watching her as if sizing up the distance between survival and failure. Vera rose slowly, rifle steady, heart slamming against her ribs. Behind her, Sila stirred. What is it? Stay down. He tried to sit, failed, groaned. Talk to me. Wolves. His exhale was soft, bitter. Of course it's wolves. Another shape joined the first, then a third. They fanned out through the trees, not rushing, not careless. They knew she was armed, but they also knew hunger, and hunger always had more patience than bullets. She didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, she shifted her stance and moved forward, just a step, just enough to show she wasn't meat. The largest wolf paused, ears twitching, eyes narrowing. A moment passed, then another, and finally it turned and vanished into the brush. The others followed, silent as ghosts. Vera held still until the last tail disappeared into shadow, then let her breath out in a slow, shaking stream. Behind her, Silas whispered, "Remind me never to call you Frail again." She turned to him. "Don't flatter me, I didn't scare them off. They just weren't ready yet." Still, she let herself believe for a moment that maybe she'd bought them time. The sky was lightening, a pale silver bleeding through the trees. It made the world feel less suffocating but not safer. They had to move. She crouched beside Sila's. "Can you walk?" He shook his head. "Can you stand?" A pause, then a nod. "Maybe." "That's good enough." They moved slow, slower than she wanted. The snow was deeper in some places, and it soaked into their boots, their cuffs, their lungs. Vera kept the rifle slung over her shoulder now, one arm around Silas's waist, half carrying him when he stumbled. He didn't complain, didn't talk, just gritted his teeth and moved when she pulled. By mid-morning, they reached the river. It wasn't much. Barely more than a ribbon of half-frozen water threading through the valley, but it meant something. She remembered a map, half-faded, stuffed in her bag. A trapper's lodge lay 2, maybe 3 miles west of the river bend. If it still stood. If it hadn't been burned out or buried in snow. If the man who lived there hadn't gone south for winter. Too many ifs and not enough bullets. But it was something. They followed the river, moving between trees when the banks grew slick. Vera watched the sky, the trees, the wind. She watched everything because the silence hadn't lifted. Not completely. She knew what that meant. Either the wolves were tracking them or the men from the ridge still were. At midday, Silas collapsed. He didn't fall hard, just sort of crumpled like a sack losing shape. Vera tried to catch him, but her knees buckled too. They landed in the snow together, both breathless, both broken. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Silas whispered, "You should leave me." She didn't answer. "You won't make it carrying me," he said. "You barely made it last night. You're shaking." She turned to him, her voice flat. "I know." "So leave." "No." His jaw tensed. "I'm not worth it." "I know." That silenced him. She reached into her coat and pulled out a strip of jerky, chewed it slow, then forced a piece into his mouth. He didn't resist, just chewed like it hurt. When it was gone, she gave him water. A little. Enough to keep him lucid. Then she helped him up again. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't mercy. It was survival. She couldn't make it through this alone, not really. Not yet. And he'd taken a bullet meant for her. That counted for something, even if it didn't erase the smirk from that first night by the fire. "You've got grit," he muttered as they walked. She didn't answer. "I mean it," he said. "I was wrong." Still no answer. "I deserve that," he mumbled. "Yes," she said at last, "you do." By late afternoon, the lodge came into view. She almost didn't believe it at first. Just a dark shape through the trees, leaning slightly, smoke curling from the chimney like a dream. But as they got closer, it sharpened. A real door, a real roof, a stack of firewood. She nearly wept. The man who answered her knock wasn't what she expected. Young, too young, maybe 17, and jumpy, with pale eyes and a rifle nearly as long as he was tall. But when he saw Silas bleeding behind her, he stepped aside. "You can come in," he said, "but don't shoot me." "We won't," she said, though her hand stayed near the rifle all the same. Inside was warm. Not cozy, nothing out here ever was, but warm. A fire, a pot of something bitter on the stove, and 2 bedrolls near the hearth. Vera helped Silas down onto one. The boy hovered nearby, awkward. "Your trappers?" she asked. He shook his head. "My brother was, he's dead." "I'm sorry." He shrugged like it didn't matter. "You followed the river." She nodded. "Someone else did too. Passed by here yesterday. 3 men. Asked if I'd seen a rider with a busted shoulder and a woman with a scar." Vera stiffened. "What'd you tell them?" "That I hadn't." She studied him. Why lie? He looked away, didn't like their eyes. Vera took a long breath. "Thank you." He shrugged again. "You can stay the night. After that, well, up to you." She nodded. "That's enough." That night Silas burned hotter. She changed the dressing twice, using clean cloth the boy handed her. He said his name was Eli. Didn't say much else. Just watched the window like he expected someone to come knocking. They didn't, not that night. But just before dawn, Vera stepped outside to relieve herself, and saw something in the snow. Tracks. Fresh. Boot prints, wide and heavy, circling the lodge once, then heading back into the trees. They were being watched. She didn't wake Silas, didn't wake Eli. She just crouched by the fire, rifle across her knees, and waited. The storm wasn't over. It had just changed its shape. The fire popped sharply and Vera's grip tightened on the rifle. She hadn't moved from her place by the hearth in nearly 2 hours. The tracks outside hadn't lied. Someone had come close enough to touch the outer walls of the cabin to hear breathing through the logs to count heads if they were quiet enough. But no knock came, no voice, just a slow, deliberate walk around the lodge and back into the woods. A warning, a message, or worse, an invitation. By the time dawn broke, casting light through the frost-covered windows, Vera's limbs ached from holding still. Her knees protested as she stood and stretched. Silas was still asleep, fevered but breathing steady. Eli had curled up with his coat for a blanket, his hat pulled over his eyes, but Vera knew he wasn't truly sleeping either. He was young, but not stupid. People didn't get this far out into the wilderness by being either. "You see them?" he asked, voice rough from quiet. "No," she said, "just tracks." "Same ones?" "Could be." He sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his neck. "They ain't gonna stop." "I know. We should run." Vera looked toward the door, then back to Silas, who moaned softly in his sleep. "We can't." "You can, he can't, you know that." She didn't answer. Instead, she crossed the room and refilled the kettle, setting it back over the low fire. The water hissed quietly. Her hands shook just a little, but not from cold. Eli rose and pulled on his boots, then paused at the window, lifting the edge of the heavy curtain just enough to peek out. "They come back today. We might not have time to choose." That was the truth of it. Silence wasn't safety. It was pressure winding tighter with each hour they stayed in place. Vera knew the type of men who made threats by walking in circles. They weren't out for loot. They weren't desperate. They were hunting for the pleasure of it, for pride, for control. And that made them dangerous in a way bullets couldn't always answer. By noon, Silas woke, groggy, disoriented but alive. "How bad?" he rasped. "Still breathing," she said, crouching beside him. "Good sign." "Barely." He shifted, biting back a groan. "The boy." "Eli still here, still jumpy." Silas grunted. "You tell him thank you." "Not yet." "Tell him." She poured a bit of warm broth into a cup and held it to Silas's lips. He drank in small sips, his hands shaking when he tried to hold the cup himself. She didn't let him. After a moment, he stopped fighting her and let the help happen. That, more than anything, told her how deep the wound had sunk. They made a plan that afternoon. Not a good one, but something. Eli had a sled for hauling game. Vera packed it with supplies, bedrolls, and the rifle. Silas couldn't walk more than a few steps at a time, so the plan was simple. Vera would pull. Eli would scout. If the men returned, they'd run not back down the river, but up the ridge toward an abandoned mining trail Eli claimed was half-collapsed but passable. Dangerous, narrow, and slow, but hidden. And most importantly, unknown to anyone who hadn't grown up in these woods. "They'll see us if we wait till morning," Eli said as they strapped down the last of the gear. "Snow will keep falling till dark, then it'll freeze." "Then we move at dusk," Vera said. Silas frowned. "You sure?" "No. Feels like a death march. Most good plans do." They left the lodge just before sunset. The snow had stopped for now, leaving a pale haze across the land. Every footstep crunched, loud and unforgiving. Vera pulled the sled by a rope looped across her chest, her shoulders burning almost immediately. Silas lay bundled beneath blankets, half-conscious, the rifle clutched in his lap. Eli moved ahead in short bursts, pausing to listen every few minutes, one hand always on the pistol holstered at his hip. The trail climbed fast. Trees grew denser, the path narrowing between stone walls and icy drop-offs. Twice Vera had to stop and retie the sled ropes when they slipped loose. Her gloves were soaked through within the hour, her breath coming in clouds. Still, she didn't complain, didn't speak, just moved. By the time full dark had fallen, they'd gained a few miles and lost all sense of direction. Eli claimed they were close to the switchback that would lead down to the gorge, but Vera saw only shadows and more trees. Her legs trembled, but she didn't stop. If she stopped, she wouldn't start again. Then came the voice. Not from behind, Not from the trees. Above. Well now, it drawled, ain't this a surprise? Vera froze. Eli spun, drawing his pistol, but the shot came too fast. It clipped his hat clean off and sent him scrambling behind a snowdrift. Vera dropped to the ground, shielding Silas as a second voice laughed low and slow from higher up the slope. You think you're clever, girl. Think we wouldn't follow your tracks. Think you could just run. Three shadows emerged from the trees above, rifles slung and relaxed. The man in front wore a coat too fine for these parts and a grin carved from cruelty. His name, though Vera had never asked, was Pierce. Silas had mentioned him once back when they still thought the fire was safe and the snow would hold. Bounty hunter, thief, killer for coin. Pierce raised his rifle. Eli fired first. The shot hit one of the other men square in the leg. He went down screaming, rolling toward the slope. Chaos erupted. Vera grabbed the rifle from Silas's lap, aimed high, and fired once, twice, missing but not by much. It was enough. Pierce ducked, swore, and the third man broke left, trying to flank. Eli ran. Not away, toward them. He reached Vera's side, breathless and wild-eyed. We can't stay, they'll pin us in. Can we go up? She asked. He hesitated. Maybe, there's a cave half-mile. You think you can pull him that far? She didn't answer. She just stood, wrapped the rope tighter across her chest, and started moving. The slope was brutal. Snow slipped beneath her boots, the sled jerking behind her like dead weight. Silas tried to help, pushing with one foot, but the effort nearly made him pass out. She dragged him anyway. Her hands bled beneath her gloves. Her lungs burned. They didn't stop. Gunfire rang out again, closer now, shouting. Eli fired blindly behind them, then reloaded, hands fumbling. There, he shouted, the cave. She saw it, just a dark slash in the hillside, low and narrow. Barely big enough for a child, let alone 3 bodies and a sled. But she didn't question. She crawled toward it, dragging Silas over frozen roots and sharp stone. Inside was cold, tight, pitch dark. Eli ducked in after her and pulled a tattered canvas across the opening, burying the edges in snow. Silence. Then footsteps. Pierce's voice closer. You run fast for a girl. Vera didn't breathe. You think this little hidey-hole will save you. A pause. You should have just let him die, sweetheart. Would have been easier. Vera pressed her fingers to the trigger, but the rifle was empty. She didn't speak. Didn't move. Outside, Pierce chuckled. I'll wait, you know, got nothing but time. Then the footsteps faded. Not gone, just waiting. In the dark, Vera finally let herself shake. The cave smelled of damp stone and old rot, but Vera didn't complain. She pressed her back to the wall and slid down slowly, her hands still frozen in a grip even though the rifle was empty. Eli sat opposite her, his knees drawn tight, pistol resting in his lap. The canvas covering the cave's mouth didn't block all the cold, but it softened the wind. It also muffled the world outside, enough to leave them unsure whether silence meant they were safe or simply being surrounded. Silas lay between them, barely conscious. His skin was waxy, jaw slack, and when he breathed, it sounded more like drowning. She'd seen this kind of fever before. The kind that ended with a man going still and a woman staring down at her hands, wondering if she'd done enough, or if she should have run sooner. How many shots you got left? She whispered. Eli didn't look at her. 3. You sure? Counted twice. Vera nodded, though her heart sank. 3 rounds, a pistol, a knife strapped to her boot. And outside, 2 men who knew this land better than she did, who had the time and the cruelty to wait. Pierce wouldn't rush. He was the kind of man who enjoyed watching people run out of choices. She didn't know how he'd followed them so fast, but it didn't matter. He had. And now, all that stood between her and a bullet was a boy with steady hands and more nerve than luck. Vera leaned forward and pressed her hand to Silas's forehead. He stirred but didn't wake. His skin was like fire. She looked at Eli. "We need to boil snow," she said. "Sterilize the wound again, keep him from seizing." Eli raised a brow. "Boil it where?" Vera hesitated. The cave had no vent, no air pocket that wouldn't trap smoke. A fire inside would suffocate them before it helped, but going outside meant light, sound, exposure. Still, doing nothing meant letting the fever burn him alive. She reached for her bag and pulled out the dented kettle, then wrapped it in a cloth. "I'll go," she said quietly. "You stay with him." Eli's face twisted. "It should be me. They're watching for a boy. And not for you. They don't expect me to walk into a trap. That's our edge." It was half a lie, but she needed his aim more than she needed her own. Eli relented after a pause. "You step wrong, they'll shoot." "Then I won't step wrong." Vera slipped out of the cave before either of them could second-guess it further. The canvas rustled against her shoulders, and the cold bit into her cheeks like teeth. She moved low, staying close to the ridge wall, avoiding open snow. Every footfall felt like a thunderclap, even though she moved slow, careful. Her eyes scanned every branch and rise above her for the shimmer of a rifle scope or the glint of metal. She found a narrow run of stone that dipped into a dry stream bed, shallow but hidden, and followed it until she was nearly 100 yards from the cave. There, she dug through the top layer of snow until she reached ice, then chipped a hole wide enough to scoop water. Her breath came hard in the cold, fogging the kettle. Her ears strained for the snap of a twig or the shift of a boot, but heard nothing. Just wind, just distance. She didn't trust it. She kept moving. 15 minutes later, she was back in the cave. Eli took the kettle without a word and pressed it to the coals he'd banked behind a ring of loose stones near the back wall. Smoke curled, but just barely. The heat was slow but steady. Silas moaned again, his arm jerking in sleep. Vera grabbed his hand and held it tight until the tremor passed. "He's getting worse," Eli said. "I know. You think he'll make it?" "I don't know." They didn't speak for a while after that. The water boiled by dusk. Vera soaked what clean cloth they had left, wrung it out, and pressed it to Silas's wound again. He whimpered, the sound sharp and childlike, but he didn't wake. His fever wasn't breaking, but it hadn't broken him yet. "You care about him?" Eli asked softly. Vera didn't look up. "Not like that." "Then why are you risking your life?" She didn't answer, not right away. Instead, she focused on Silas's breathing, on the rise and fall of his chest, the tension in his jaw, the thin tremble in his fingers. She remembered the first night he'd smiled at her, a crooked thing, smug and easy. She remembered the moment it faltered, when she'd held his rifle and returned fire without flinching. "He took a bullet meant for me," she said finally. "That's not something I forget." Eli nodded. "Still seems like a hell of a trade." "It always is." Night fell slow and bitter. They took turns dozing, brief spells, only a few minutes at a time. Vera slept with her boots on, the knife in her belt. Eli stayed near the canvas, pistol resting on his knee. Neither of them said it out loud, but both were waiting for the noise. The slip of a boot outside, the whisper of a voice, the crack of a rifle. It came around midnight. Not a shot, not even a footstep. A match strike. The flare of it lit the cave wall through the canvas, soft, small, like someone lighting a cigarette just beyond reach. Vera's breath caught. Eli turned to her, eyes wide. They waited. Then a voice. Calm, casual. "You like caves, sweetheart?" Vera rose to her knees, hand on her knife. She didn't speak. "I figured you might," Pierce said. "You got that quiet kind of stubborn in you, the kind that digs in when it should run. I respect that." Another pause. "You're not stupid," he continued. "You know how this ends. I got a bottle in my saddlebag and a coat that ain't full of holes. You come out, we talk. Hell, I might even let the boy go." Eli stiffened beside her. Vera kept her eyes on the canvas. She could see his silhouette now, lean, tall, standing just 10 feet away. The match burned out. The darkness returned. "Don't make me smoke you out," he said quietly. "Don't make me drag you by your hair." Then came silence. Real silence. They waited. Then Eli leaned in close. "He's not bluffing." "No," Vera said, "he's not." "What do we do?" She looked at Silas, at his face flushed and fevered, at the patch of ice spreading slowly beneath him from his soaked blankets. The sled was outside. Their food was low. The rifle had no bullets left. And yet there was still something inside her, a flicker. "We dig," she said. Eli blinked. "What?" "Behind the stones. You said this was an old cave. You sure it doesn't run deeper?" He hesitated, never looked. "Then look now." They moved the coals aside, fast but careful. Vera scraped at the loose earth with her hands while Eli pried at the wall. The cold stung. Their fingers bled. But after 20 minutes Vera found it, a crack just wide enough for a body to squeeze through. A tunnel. She looked at Eli. "Help me lift him." Together they pulled Silas upright. He groaned, half awake, but didn't fight them. Vera crawled into the tunnel first, dragging her pack behind her. Then Eli pushed Silas in, inch by inch, until he could follow. The space was tight, damp. It reeked of old roots and trapped air, but it curved downward away from the cave. Vera led the way, shoulders scraping the walls. Behind her, Eli whispered directions, guiding by instinct and hope. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel widened. A hollow. Just wide enough to stand, just high enough to breathe. They slumped to the ground, exhausted. Silas lay between them, breathing ragged. Above them faintly they heard movement, voices, the crack of stone being shifted, and then Pierce's voice, sharp with triumph. "Well, look here." A pause. Then gunfire. Vera flinched, but it wasn't in the cave. It was outside, distant, the echo of something further down the trail. Eli leaned close. "Maybe someone else. Or maybe he's just celebrating." Silas stirred. His eyes opened. And for the first time in days, he spoke clearly. "They're not after me." Vera stared. "What?" His gaze locked on hers. "They're after you." The words landed like stone. "They're after you." Vera froze, her hand still resting on Silas's shoulder, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and something colder. "What are you talking about?" she asked, the question low, sharp, not demanding but already suspecting. Silas's face was damp with sweat, but the fever glass in his eyes had cleared. Not fully, but enough to bring back the edge that had been missing since the bullet took him down. He coughed, the sound raw, then shifted against the wall of the narrow chamber. "They're not bounty men, not really." Eli leaned forward from where he crouched nearby, confusion creasing his brow. "Then what the hell are they?" Silas didn't answer right away. His jaw moved like he was working through pain or guilt, maybe both. Then finally, "They're cleaners." Vera's gut twisted. "Explain." Silas looked up at her, really looked. "Do you remember Pike's Bend?" 100 images slammed into her mind at once. The dry riverbed, the smoke curling from the church roof, the girl in the lavender dress clutching her baby brother, screaming for help that never came. The silence afterward, the way every official inquiry came back blank, the way no one wrote the names down. "Barely," Vera said, voice tightening. "I remember it real well," Silas said, "because I was there." Eli's voice rose, sharper now. "What does that mean?" Silas coughed again. "It means I rode with the ones that lit that fire. Not long, not like them. I didn't know at first. They said we were chasing rebels, raiders, trying to keep the peace. But they weren't after rebels. They were after anyone who knew what they'd done in the last town over. You saw it too, didn't you, Vera?" She nodded once. They burned the women and left the rest for wolves. Silas's voice broke just a little. And the ones who refused, who asked questions, who wouldn't look away, they got cleaned too, quietly, names erased, whole families disappeared. Eli shifted backward as if Silas had suddenly grown larger, more dangerous. So what, you were one of them? No, Silas rasped. I tried to walk, after Pike's Bend, said I'd had enough, said I'd testify if anyone ever opened an investigation. But you don't leave people like that, you just become a liability. Vera's voice cut the dark. So you ran. He looked at her. Yeah, and I kept running until I met you. She felt the full weight of his meaning. They think I know something. You do, he said softly. You saw them in Pike's Bend. Even if you didn't know who they were, even if you never said a word, that's enough. They don't take chances. Eli stood, pacing now, the pistol swinging loosely in his hand. So this was never about the bounty on you. They were tracking her. She was just supposed to die alongside me, Silas said. Make it look random. Vera sat back slowly, the air in the small cavern growing too tight, too sour. She should have seen it sooner. The way Pierce looked at her that first time, the calm certainty in his voice. He hadn't expected her to live long enough to become a threat, just another body in the snow. Eli stopped pacing. So what now? Silas was already sagging back against the wall, drained. They'll think we're dead. The cave collapsed. The trail's impassable. They might leave. They won't, Vera said. Not yet. Eli's jaw clenched. So we fight. No, she said, standing now, brushing dust from her trousers. We survive. Same thing, he muttered. She turned to Silas. Can you move? He nodded weakly. Then we go. The tunnel twisted on, deeper than Vera thought possible. Long ago, some miner had carved a way through the ridge, maybe trying to reach another vein of gold or simply to escape collapse. Either way, the path was still intact, narrow, damp, and lightless, but intact. They moved single file, Vera in front, Eli behind, and Silas in the middle. She could hear every staggered breath from Silas, every scuff of Eli's boots behind her, and the occasional drip of water from somewhere unseen. It felt like walking through the lungs of a dying beast, wet and wheezing and close. After an hour, the passage split. Vera paused, turning her lamp left, then right. The left path sloped upward. The right plunged down into darkness. She turned to Eli. You know this stretch. He shook his head. Never came this far. Vera hesitated. Up meant light, air, exposure. Down meant cold and longer wait, but possibly escape. She closed her eyes, listening. And then faintly from the left passage, wind. The sound of open space. We go up, she said. They emerged just past dawn. The passage spat them out onto a frozen overlook, sharp cliffs cutting into a valley below. Far to the east, smoke curled from a line of trees, too thin and distant to be natural. A signal. A campfire, maybe, or a trail. Silas collapsed in the snow. Eli dropped beside him. Vera scanned the horizon. Below them, the land dipped into what looked like a dry wash, then rose again into a low ridge. No houses, no fences, just wilderness. But there, just barely, on the western edge of the wash, she saw a crooked chimney rising from the trees. Cabin, she said, pointing. Eli followed her gaze. Think anyone's home. Doesn't matter, she said. We need shelter. They rested only long enough for Silas to get his breath. Then they made the slow descent. It took nearly an hour, Vera holding Silas under one arm, Eli watching their back with eyes too sharp for someone his age. No one spoke. Words had become too heavy. By midday, they reached the cabin. It leaned hard to one side and the door sagged on rusted hinges. No smoke, no footprints, but it was dry and the stove inside still had a pile of wood stacked neatly beside it. Someone had lived here once, maybe not long ago. Vera got the fire going. Eli scouted the nearby trail. Silas slept. Night came fast. The stars above looked like shards of glass scattered across coal, and the wind had teeth again. Vera sat by the fire, her boots steaming, watching the door. She deboarded it shut, wedged a chair beneath the handle. But the wood was thin. The bullets, if they came, would not care how much effort she'd spent making it feel like home. Eli came in after dark, shivering. I saw tracks. Vera's stomach sank. Men. Hard to say, just one set, but deep, heavy, came from the east, doubled back. She nodded. They're still looking. He dropped beside her. We need a plan. She pulled the pistol from his belt and turned it in her hands. You said 3 shots. He nodded. Still 3. She handed it back. Use them wisely. You got a death wish? He asked quietly. No, she said, but I'm done hiding. Eli watched her, eyes flickering with something like admiration. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. At that they both turned as Silas stirred behind them. He sat up slowly, wincing, then looked between them. You planning to walk into their fire? He asked Vera. No, she said. I'm planning to make them regret following me. She left just after midnight. Alone. Silas tried to stop her, but he didn't have the strength. Eli didn't try at all, just handed her a scrap of map he'd drawn from memory and a small pouch of bullets she hadn't known he'd saved. Use them, he said. I will. She moved fast, crossing the ridge and circling back east toward the fire she'd seen earlier. The land here was twisted, ridges bleeding into valleys, thick with deadfall and ice. It took her hours, moving in near silence, to find the source. Pierce's camp. 3 bedrolls, 2 horses, a fire burning low. 1 man awake. Vera crouched in the underbrush and watched. He stood with his back to the fire, rubbing his hands together, rifle on his hip, revolver in the snow beside him, confident, alone. She moved closer. Slow. Measured. When she was 20 feet away, she stood. The man turned and froze. Vera raised the pistol. Tell me where the rest are, she said. He didn't speak. Tell me or I shoot. Still silence. Then he grinned. You're bluffing. She fired. The bullet hit the snow an inch from his foot. He flinched, swore. They're a mile west, he snapped. Heading toward the ridge. Think they're pushing you down the wash. How many? 2, just 2. Not anymore, she said. And fired again. The second shot didn't miss. The man fell backward into the snow without so much as a shout, his body thudding against the earth like wet firewood. The pistol in Vera's hand smoked faintly, but her grip didn't falter. She watched him for a full 10 seconds, breath caught in the hollow between her ribs. Then she stepped forward, crouched low, and checked his pulse with the back of her glove. Gone. She didn't linger. The horses tied nearby stamped nervously, their ears flicking toward the trees as if sensing the balance had shifted. Vera moved quietly, untied the reins, and took only one, an older gelding with a calm eye and a heavy chest. She found a canteen in the saddlebags, a tin of beans, and most important, 5 rounds for a Colt .45. She pocketed the bullets, slung the rifle over her shoulder, and left the rest behind. The fire still hissed in the snow. The dead man's boots turned to the sky, his face still etched with disbelief. She mounted quickly and turned west. Back toward the cabin. Eli heard the horse before he saw it. He grabbed the pistol and crept toward the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. His breath fogged the glass as he leaned in, just enough to catch the figure approaching through the dusk. He exhaled sharply. Vera. She was hunched in the saddle, one arm tight around the rifle, her coat dusted white. The boy unbarred the door and opened it just as she reached the porch. She didn't speak, just slid off the saddle and handed him the reins. Water him, she said, not too much. Eli nodded, wordless, and led the horse around the side of the cabin. Vera stepped inside, every muscle in her body screaming, and dropped the rifle on the table. Silas stirred in the corner, half awake. "You found them?" he asked, voice rough. "One," she said, not bothering to explain further. Silas leaned his head back against the wall. "And the others?" "They'll be dead soon." They didn't wait long. Just before dawn, a soft crunch in the snow signaled the final act. Eli heard it first, his breath stilled, every nerve alert as he tapped Vera's arm gently. She was already awake, already clutching the rifle she'd claimed, the new bullets chambered clean and ready. Silas had managed to sit upright, a revolver resting loosely in his lap, his face gray but his eyes hard. Footsteps. 2 sets, careful, calculated. They were moving low, likely thinking Vera and the others were still asleep, still huddled behind weak walls and weaker nerves. Pierce was smart, but he wasn't creative. He liked control. He liked slow kills. He didn't know Vera had been waiting for them. She moved to the window, crouched behind the low sill, and peered out just enough to see the first shape cross the fence line. A wide man with a thick coat and a shotgun held ready. Behind him, a leaner figure, faster, likely quieter, covering the rear. They flanked the cabin slowly, one moving left, the other disappearing around the back. Eli moved to the rear window, pistol cocked. Vera whispered to him without looking, "Wait for the first shot, then fire." He nodded. The seconds stretched thin, long enough for the fire to hiss in the hearth, for Silas to adjust his weight and press the revolver tight against his leg, long enough for the silence to snap. Then came the thud, boot to the door, not a full break, just testing. Vera didn't hesitate. She fired through the wall. The bullet tore through pine and hit something solid, followed by a howl. The shotgun clattered to the porch. Then came shouts, movement. The back window shattered as a shot ripped through it, lodging in the stove. Eli returned fire, the pistol leaping in his hands. Vera fired again. A scream, then silence. She rose quickly and flung open the door. The wide man lay face down, blood spreading in a fan beneath him, his gun still a foot away. She stepped over him and turned toward the woods, scanning. A flash, movement behind a tree. She ducked and rolled to cover behind the fence, heart pounding, snow wet beneath her chest. She counted to 3, then popped up and fired twice toward the trees. The second figure fell sideways, hit. She stood slowly, rifle ready, and moved toward the line of trees. The man was breathing, barely, young, no more than 20. His coat was torn and his eyes flared wide with fear as she approached. He lifted a shaking hand. "Please." Vera didn't lower her gun. "What's your name?" He swallowed. "Bo." "Who sent you?" "Pierce. He told me to finish the job." Vera stepped closer, boots crunching softly. "You know what the job was?" The boy hesitated. She crouched in front of him, lowered the rifle an inch. "Look at me and say it." He blinked. "To kill you." "Why?" "I don't know. He just said you were a ghost that shouldn't be walking." Vera's jaw clenched. She stood. "You're done following orders now." The boy trembled. "You gonna kill me?" She looked down at him, eyes hollow. "No," she said. Then she turned and walked back toward the cabin. The fire crackled low again. Silas leaned back, pale but breathing easier. Eli sat beside him, one eye on the door, the other on the battered pistol in his lap. Vera stood near the hearth, the rifle propped against the wall. Her coat steamed slowly from the heat, her face drawn but calm. No one spoke for a long while. Finally, Eli broke the silence. "What now?" Vera looked at him. "We bury the bodies." "You think more are coming?" "I don't know," she said, "but I'm not planning to find out sitting here." Silas stirred, wincing. "They won't stop, not until someone makes them." She nodded. "Then we make them." They left the cabin by noon, after burying the two men beneath the trees and scattering branches to hide the graves. Vera left a single marker, just a stone with no name. Bo had limped away toward the ridge with a canteen and Vera's warning echoing in his ears. Run far, run clean, don't look back. They traveled south, through brush and snow and frozen creeks, Sela's riding now with a little more strength, Eli walking beside the gelding. Vera led the way, rifle strapped across her back. By the time they reached the flatlands near Bell River, dusk had settled again. A town. Small, quiet, just smoke and rooftops on the horizon. Eli's eyes lit up. You think they got a doctor? They better, Vera said. Bell River wasn't much, just a main street, a few clapboard shops, a post office, and a tavern that leaned sideways like it had given up on standing proud. But it had a doctor, and more important, it had no wanted posters with Vera's name. The physician, a quiet man with a crooked back, took one look at Sela's and waved them inside. This might take a while, he said. Vera nodded. Do what you can. Eli stayed in the waiting room. Vera walked across the street and found a room at the boarding house. The woman behind the desk didn't ask questions, just slid her a key. That night, for the first time in what felt like years, Vera slept in a bed. But not deeply. She woke to a knock. Soft, measured. She rolled out of bed, pistol already in hand, and moved to the door. Who is it? Eli's voice. It's me. She opened the door, and the boy stepped inside quickly. They're here, he said. Vera froze. Who? A man, tall, black coat, silver tie pin, walked right into the sheriff's office. Did he see you? Eli shook his head. I was watching from the post office. He had the look Vera, same kind Pierce had. Her heart pounded. They won't stop, he said, even now. She nodded. And then she turned and grabbed the rifle. She was already strapping on her boots before Eli finished speaking. The boarding house room was cold again, though the coals still pulsed faintly in the stove. Vera moved fast, stuffing the remainder of her things into her satchel with practiced precision. She didn't ask again what the man had looked like, she already knew. Black coat, silver tie pin. A uniform dressed like civility, like authority. Like the last face a witness saw before they were buried nameless beneath the snow. She slung the rifle across her shoulder and looked at Eli. Did he go in alone? Eli nodded, arms crossed tight over his chest. Didn't see anyone follow, just walked right into the sheriff's office, calm as prayer. Vera clenched her jaw. Then we're already out of time. She moved to the door, but Eli stepped in front of her, eyes sharp. What are you going to do? Ask him a question. By shooting it into his chest. She didn't answer. But her silence was loud enough. The sheriff's office stood across from the post office, a squat wooden structure with one window cracked and another fully boarded. A sign hanging half crooked above the door read Law Office, Sheriff James York in faded black paint. The porch was clean, swept recently, and Vera could see two horses tied loosely out front, neither familiar. That made her pause. She crouched behind the trough across the street, squinting through the breaking dawn. One of the horses had a saddle stamped with a distinctive W, Whitlow. Her blood ran cold. That wasn't a Pierce man. That was higher. Whitlow was the name she'd seen once before, scrawled on a requisition order in Pike's Bend. Whitlow was the name whispered like thunder by the men who gave orders, not took them. She stood slowly, every movement precise, every breath measured. She felt the rifle heavy on her back, the pistol at her hip. Her heart beat steady, not fast, not slow, just ready. Stay here, she told Eli. Vera. But she was already crossing the street. Inside, the office was quiet. The desk sat empty, a tin of used coffee grounds nearby, and the stove glowed with the last embers of an overnight fire. She stepped in slowly, eyes scanning the room. Voices murmured behind the door to the back office. She moved without hesitation, gripped the handle and shoved it open. Two men turned to her, one behind the desk, gray-bearded heavyset with a badge pinned crookedly to his chest. Sheriff York, presumably. The other stood tall in a polished coat, silver pin gleaming like a knife in the lamplight. He smiled when he saw her. "Miss Langley," he said, as if greeting an old friend. "Been hoping we'd meet." Vera didn't move. Neither did her trigger finger. "You're Whitlow." "No," he said easily. "But I work for him. Name's Renner, Levi Renner, and I believe you're in possession of something dangerous." Vera's voice was low. "You'll need to be more specific." Renner glanced at York, who fidgeted nervously behind the desk, then leaned slightly forward. "Testimony, memory, witness to an event that never officially occurred. That makes you a threat, Miss Langley. Or is it Mrs. Harlan? I forget what you were going by before." Vera didn't blink. "You came all this way," she said. "Why not just kill me back in the hills?" "Because accidents are easier in remote places," Renner replied smoothly. "But your survival, your sudden reappearance here complicates things. Now it looks like an execution. That's harder to explain. We prefer neat endings." Sheriff York stood suddenly, his voice cracking. "Mr. Renner, I don't want no bloodshed in my town." "There won't be," Renner said calmly. "Not if Miss Langley understands how serious we are." Vera looked from one to the other. "And what's the offer?" "Simple. You leave, head west, far west. Somewhere with no post, no court, no curious folk asking questions. You never mention Pike S. Bend again. You disappear, and this ends here." Vera laughed, once sharp, empty. "You people killed children." Renner's smile faded. "We kept the peace." She stepped forward. "You kept secrets." His hand moved slightly, just enough to brush his coat open and reveal the revolver at his hip. "Don't make me write the report myself, Vera." But she was already moving. The gunfight was over in 3 seconds. Sheriff York flinched backward as Vera dove to the side, her pistol already clearing its holster. Renner's hand twitched toward his weapon, but he wasn't fast enough. The first shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him half around, slamming him against the desk. He shouted, stunned, as she fired again, this one shattering the oil lamp and plunging the room into sparks and smoke. York stumbled for the door, tripping over his own chair, while Renner groaned and tried to lift his arm. Vera kicked the gun from his hand, stepped over him, and pressed her boot hard against his chest. "You sent them after me," she said. Renner coughed. "You weren't supposed to survive." She knelt beside him, voice ice. "Neither are you." The shot echoed down the street. Eli came running. He found her standing just outside the office, blood on her coat, eyes unreadable. Behind her, smoke drifted from the shattered window. The horses out front stamped restlessly but didn't bolt. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded once. "Where's Silas?" "Doctor says he's stable," Eli said. "He can travel in a few days." Vera turned to look down the road where the land stretched westward into sky. Beyond that, open country, places unnamed, stories unwritten. "We leave tomorrow," she said. Eli hesitated. "Won't they send more?" "Maybe," she said, "but now they know I won't stop either." He nodded. And beside her, for the first time, he looked less like a boy and more like the kind of man she might trust to carry a fire through the dark. They stayed the night in Bell River, quiet and low. Sheriff York didn't speak to them again. He just swept out the back office, told no one what had happened, and watched them from the window like a man who knew the weight of silence. The town breathed easier after that. No more strangers arrived. No more cold-eyed men asking soft-spoken questions with sharp edges. And when morning came, Vera led the way out of town, Eli riding beside her, Silas bundled in the cart bed behind, half asleep but breathing. The gelding walked steady. The road ahead curved gently through dry grass and soft red stone. A trail without signs, a map without names, a future without permission. They traveled for 3 days through wide, open country. Silas spoke little, but his color returned. His voice grew steadier. At night, he watched the fire with a look Vera recognized, a man counting the things he'd lost and the ones still left to protect. Eli rode out ahead each morning, sometimes just to scout the river bends, sometimes to chase the wind. He laughed more now, but he also kept his knife sharpened and his pistol close. On the 4th night, they made camp near a broken fence line. A ruined farm once stood there, long abandoned, just a tangle of charred posts and a collapsed barn. Vera wandered through it quietly, her fingers brushing old timber, her mind heavy with memory. Silas found her there. "Places like this," he said, "always feel like they're holding their breath." She nodded. "You ever think about settling down?" he asked, "making something new?" She looked at the scorched earth, the bones of old dreams. "I think about surviving." He stepped closer. "That's not the same as living." Vera turned. "Not yet, but maybe someday." He smiled, tired but true. "I'll hold you to that." They crossed into Arizona territory on the 5th morning. The land was drier now, more red than brown, the sun hotter even in early spring. They found water in a narrow canyon, trickling cold from between rocks, and Eli caught 2 rabbits near the creek bend. It felt almost normal. But that night, as the fire burned low, Vera sat with Silas and stared into the dark. "They'll come again," she said. "Even after Renner, they'll send someone else." Silas nodded. "Then we'll keep going. We can't run forever. Then we make a stand, somewhere worth defending." She looked at him. "You sure?" He didn't flinch. "I don't want to run either." She glanced toward the boy, curled up beside the coals, his hat over his eyes. "And Eli?" Silas followed her gaze. "He's got more fight in him than I ever did at his age." Vera smiled. "He's got more heart than both of us combined." And for a long time, they sat in silence. Not afraid. Just waiting. The next town was nothing more than a trading post and a church steeple. But it had a name, Wren's Hollow. And it had room. They stayed. Not forever, not yet, but long enough to build something. A place to rest. A space to breathe. Silas worked with the carpenter, Eli helped with the stables, and Vera watched it all unfold like a story she hadn't dared to write. But one she now wanted to finish. Peace came, but never quietly. Weeks passed in Wren's Hollow. The cabin stood. The boy laughed. The man she once thought she'd lose now fixed fences beside her and watched her hands as she worked. Vera almost believed this was all it would be, healing, routine, quiet. But scars like hers didn't fade. They itched when danger got close. It came on a Wednesday, dressed like nothing. The man said his name was Archer. Said he worked for Whitlow, but not the burning kind. Said he had records, letters, names. Said he could bring the whole thing down, but only with her. And when Vera didn't shoot him where he stood, she knew her own answer. She was tired of surviving. She was ready to fight on paper and in court. They rode out again, her, Eli, Silas, and the stranger, not for revenge, not to run. To finish it. The trial was slow, painful, every detail dragged through the dust. Vera told the truth. Every name, every fire, every child. She didn't flinch, she didn't cry, she made them hear it. Whitlow never looked at her once. But the jury did. And that was enough. Conviction came, 15 years more to follow. They didn't cheer. They just walked outside into the wind and didn't run anymore. They never went back to Wren's Hollow. But Eli wrote, Told the town he was thinking of becoming a writer. Said he'd seen what justice really looked like. Signed it Eli Langley. The ranch stood in southern Arizona. Quiet, clean, no name on the fence, they didn't need one. The people who found it were the ones meant to. And the ones who left never forgot her name. The woman who was too frail to survive. And survived anyway.